Hello, everybody. Welcome back to History's Finest Podcast. Um, I'm Ricardo Murphy, and this is my colleague, David Chow. We will be talking about Industrial Revolution and how it impacted the world in the 19th century. David?
Hello, everyone. So, we're going to start off with the advancements in new industries during the Second Industrial Revolution. The Second Industrial Revolution saw advancements in new industries. These advancements ultimately led to many new possibilities in production. One of these advancements was steel, which replaced iron because of how strong and cheap steel was compared to iron. This development allowed rail lines to be built at competitive costs, which increased the transportation of goods and people. Steel also promoted the construction of better ships, skyscrapers, and bridges. Advancement in electricity also played a large part in the possibilities of production. Thomas Edison and Joseph Swan's invention of the light bulb, for example, caused many changes to occur. Less houses and factories burned down as they switched from candles and gas lighting to electrical lighting. The English used Swan's light bulb to light Mosley Street in Newcastle upon Tyne, which was the first electrical street lighting installation in the world. Many manufacturers now made new inventions that used electricity to make life easier for people, like the vacuum, stove, iron, and many others. Chemicals were also being developed for use in other industries. Dynamites and explosives were discovered by Alfred Nobel and were used in the construction of tunnels, roads, oil wells, and quarries. Nitrogen fertilizers were also invented to help with increasing the food supply. The creation of the Haber process to make ammonia allowed for the continued production of nitrate-based fertilizers and explosives. Now we'll move on to how transportation and communication affected trade.
Thank you. Ways in which advancements in transportation affected trade, migration, or global interaction are firstly, with the invention of the steam engine, created by Thomas Savery in the mid 19th century. This invention eventually led to the more popular railroads of today. The railroads allowed colonizing superpowers like Great Britain or America at the time to improve their trade system, since they allowed for easy transport of goods from point A to point B. The steamboat was also an example of transportation. It made for fast, punctual shipping between countries across the ocean. These machines connected countries around the world even easier than before. The use of railroads and steamboats caused a mass migration of people within North America and Europe, and also overseas due to the economic growth in these places. An example of a medium of communication that affected these things would be telegraph cables. The initial development of this product by the French and British was to allow for an easier way to interact with colonies, with the first being laid in 1866 across the Atlantic Ocean. This also helped with trading because it improved commercial ties with the colonies, Europe, and other continents. These telegraphs also allowed for messages to travel faster to and from telegraph offices all over the world. With the use of the cables, talk of economic growth spread like wildfire and created an inflow of immigrants to Europe and North America. Now we'll be moving on to David with the next topic.
Now we'll be talking about the newly created state of Germany. So, Germany had not industrialized until almost a century after Britain because of the German states were not unified until then. However, they became just as successful, if not more successful, than Britain. Germany's industrialization began with the building of railroads between the 1840s and 1850s, and the development of the coal mining and steel and iron production, activities that could be seen in the First Industrial Revolution. In Germany, the Second Industrial Revolution followed their First Industrial Revolution so closely that the states experienced the two revolutions almost simultaneously. Germany promoted industries within its borders by creating the Zollverein, or the Toll Union, in 1833 that abolished tolls between the various German states, making Germany into a common market. This toll union allowed for the German states to catch up in terms of railroads and coal mining, and the profit from these industries were used to help other industries in Germany, especially the chemical and electrical industry. Germany's chemists became famous for their discoveries, and by 1914, Germany was producing half of the world's electrical equipment. Next, we'll move on to how the industrialization impacted imperialism.
Thank you. One way that industrialization impacted imperialism in the 19th century is that it created not only the need for Europe to expand, but the power to successfully take and profitably maintain so many colonies overseas. The Industrial Revolution created the need for Europe to take over colonies around the world. An example would be Britain using their resources from the revolution to colonize countries like India and Egypt. Now it's off to David again.
Now we'll be talking about how China and Japan reacted to the threats of foreign industrial powers. Because of the Industrial Revolution in Europe and the United States, the gap between them and the West became apparent, leaving China and Japan behind technologically and militarily. The way China and Japan reacted to the West's increasing power was very different. The Chinese government rejected Lord Napier, who was sent by Britain in 1834 to request a more open trade between the two countries. And further tensions led to the Opium War, where the Chinese was defeated by the British and forced into many unequal treaties. The Japanese, however, accepted negotiations with Western powers. Commodore Perry, who was sent by the United States, returned from Japan with news that Japan was willing to open its ports. These events led to the Treaty of Kanagawa by Japan and the Treaty of Nanking by China. The outcome of China and Japan could be seen in their treaties, since China's treaties was signed after large military losses and was far less favorable than Japan's treaty. One factor that contributed to the differences in responses was the timing. Since Japan was forced by Western powers to open trade a little bit later than the rest of Asia, Japan was able to see the results of China's Opium War and the consequences. Another factor was their difference in knowledge of the West. China's knowledge of the West was limited since the only documents they had of the West was during the Ming Dynasty, and contact with foreigners was restricted to Canton. The Japanese differed since they allowed and promoted learning about the West. Japan even created the Institute for the Investigation of Barbarian Books, which eventually became the School of Western Knowledge and Languages. And that's going to be it for today about the Industrial Revolution. Tune in next time to the History's Finest podcast, where we will be talking about more fun historic topics with me and Ricardo.
All right.